going to be brief this morning, and I'm going to let a couple people do some talking about how they see grace at work in their lives. But let me call our attention to a few passages as we kind of think about this. Look what it says in John chapter 1, verses 16 through 18. It says, "From the fullness of his grace, we have all received one blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but God, the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known." Jesus reveals to us what God is like. No one has ever seen God, John writes. But God, the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known. Jesus then reveals God to us, and it's important how he reveals him. It says, for the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. So Jesus reveals God and reveals God to be a God of grace. In order to know God, we must know grace. And that kind of introduces us to what we are about as a church. Because grace reveals God, Hope Church was founded upon and continues to exist upon the grace of God. What do we mean when we talk about grace? Grace, as a word applied generally, it means graciousness of manner and action. Grace is about liberality and kindness and generosity. When it is applied to God, here's one definition I liked. It says, divine influence on the heart and its reflection in the life. I like that relative to the grace of God. Divine influence on the heart and its reflection in the life. Coming to understand the grace of God, the kindness of God, the generousness of God, the liberality of God, impacts our heart and reflects itself in our life. Not only is grace a winsome idea, but grace is also very effective when it comes to cultivating spirituality. Grace works. What it says in Titus 2. It says, for the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age, while we wait for the blessed hope, the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us to redeem us from all wickedness and to purify for himself a people that are his very own, eager to do what is good. Jesus came to redeem us from all wickedness and to purify for himself a people that are his very own, not only who do good, but are eager to do what is good. So if you're going to create people who are redeemed from wickedness and are eager to do what is good, what teacher do you send to bring that to be, to bring that into existence? And what it says, the grace of God is what teaches us to say no to ungodliness and yes to godliness. Ungodliness influences us. And if you try to think of what it means to be ungodly, I think one way we might see it, ungodliness is about loving things and using people. I think that describes ungodliness. It's loving things and using people. What's godliness then? Godliness influences us to do the opposite. It influences us to love people and use things. Grace is what teaches us to say no to ungodliness and yes to godliness. If you think about it, Jesus comes to redeem us from wickedness. What's at the heart of sin? You're to boil sin down. What's at its heart? Would you agree? The inability to wait. Think about sin. Are not murder and adultery sins of impatience? Needing to have now what I can't wait for? Needing to have now what I choose not to put off? I think murder and adultery, along with all sins, are sins of impatience, the inability to manage coveting. What grace does, by helping us to wait for the blessed hope, grace enables us to wait. I'm going to say that again. by enabling us to wait for the blessed hope. Grace enables us to wait, and by enabling us to wait, grace enables us to say no to the immediate gratification that characterizes worldliness. What God would teach us is to defer gratification. If you don't believe you're going to be with him on the far side of the grave, your ability to defer gratification is not going to be very strong. Grace teaches us to be sure of our connection with God and what happens on the far side of the grave. As that sinks down into our heart, it reflects itself in our life. Enough of me talking about these things. Rather than just talking about how grace works, I'm going to call forward a couple of people to illustrate it in their life. Lorraine Hanson's going to come up, and she's going to share, and then after her, Kent Becker is going to come up. Come on up, Lorraine.
Morning. It's kind of an uncomfortable spot for me to be up here. When Mike asked me to talk and tell a little bit about my story, it's kind of an intimidating thought for me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that having an opportunity to tell my story is something. It's something I can't not do it, because it's the message I've heard here and the people in this community of faith have impacted me so greatly that that this is an opportunity for me to share that, and maybe it might connect with somebody else of you out there. So anyway, the more I thought about it, it's not really so much just telling my story because it's interesting or why anyone would particularly care to hear it. The focus of why I want to do this is because I want to focus on the impact that this message heard here has had on me, and the difference it makes in ordinary people's lives like mine. So with that, I'll just kind of give you a little background of how I came to hope. I was raised in the church in a predominant denomination is what I'm trying to say. And anyway, I've always known who God is, and I've always felt a close relationship with him and a desire to be close to God. And so this is, I've always, it's always been important to me. However, the concept of God that I had had a large emphasis on my responsibility in the relationship. And that gave me a lot of trouble, because as much as I wanted to feel that closeness to God, and sometimes I did, sometimes I could feel forgiven and close to him, but so much of the time I just felt like I wasn't bringing enough to the table to really be what it should be, what he wanted it to be. I just wasn't devoted enough. I wasn't giving enough. I wasn't obedient enough. I wasn't loving enough. I wasn't faithful enough. I just never felt good about myself, because I just wasn't what I thought God had a right to expect from me. So I always had the sense of disappointment and frustration, really, because I couldn't stop wanting the closeness, and I couldn't get there. And I just felt bound by this need to be close to God, and yet I couldn't make myself change to be what I thought he wanted from me. So it was a very stuck and frustrated place to be. And I felt very, I guess, in anger in a way with the frustration, because I thought that God would come in and change me to be what he wanted to be, but it wasn't happening. So whose fault was it? Was it my fault? Was it his fault? It's just, God, what do you want from me? I can't be what you want me to be. So that's kind of where I was. And then, on top of that, my life circumstances started to unravel. Within our home, our marriage was disintegrating. There was turmoil like I had never experienced before in my life. I found myself separated from my husband of over 40 years. Our children were involved in this mess. We were all just embroiled in this chaos. And so on top of my already frustrated situation with God, I added my circumstances and the disappointment and the guilt and the frustration left me desperate, absolutely desperate to find help and what to do with this. So I think this is what propelled me to look outside of my normal resources that I would have gone to for spiritual help. I felt so ashamed of where I was and like such a failure that I couldn't go to my church. I just couldn't. And so I was desperate for the truth, and so someone invited me to Hope, and I heard a different kind of message there that I was immediately attracted to. It was different than what I knew about God, because, I did know about God. I have always gone to church. I've always read the Bible. I've always had a relationship with Him. But what I heard here was different, and it drew me like metal to a magnet, but it didn't fit with what I knew about God. So I really had a conflict of images going on. Was this message of grace about God not being mad at me for where I was, but accepting me, mess and all, my inability to change, the whole mess. I heard here that God wasn't looking away from that. And that was really new to me. And I had some decisions to make about unpacking what I thought I knew about God and deciding which truth was real. And the message, not only the message that I heard, but it was the way it's delivered here and the people through whom it comes, had a quality of gentleness and authenticity that was compelling, and I needed it. And I was desperate to know the truth, and I guess that's, looking back, why God propelled me with those kind of circumstances, because otherwise I would have just stayed where I was. So the message I heard here was gentle, clear, scriptural, and consistent. Also, it was through Mike's message, it was through Bible studies, because I had a lot of questions. And I remember asking, after I heard the first couple messages in church, I said, is there a place where you can ask questions and find out more about this? Because I really needed a lot of digging. And through Randy's Bible classes, and he remembers some of those first days with me, I was pretty adamant about questions I had and just needing to get to the bottom of it. I just didn't have any pretense left. I just wanted to get to the truth. And Denise spent many conversations with me, helping me unpack feelings and notions I had about God that I didn't even realize I had. And just her way of sharing the truth with me about the absence of judgment just was huge. So the message I heard fell on me like a gentle rain. It was soothing. It was what I was looking for. It was powerful at the same time. And it was something I couldn't turn away from. There was no way I could not keep seeking this. My image of God was changing from what do you want from me kind of desperation to what I heard here was what God wanted to give to me. And about the time I started coming was when you guys started talking about the 10 commitments, and therefore kind of flipping that image to what God wanted from me, to what he had to give to me, and that it didn't depend on me. It was his deal. So then I had to ask, well, then what is my part in this grace transaction? If it's all God and it's all him giving to me, then do I have a part? What is that? And it started to look a lot different than I thought it was. And how do I stay in his good graces? Which has kind of brought me to where I am now. I'm still a seeker. I'm still learning, and I have so much to learn, but the desperation has gone out of my need to be close to God and my need to find out the truth, because I guess I've absorbed some of the gentleness and the understanding that judgment is not God's deal. And I guess I just have to say that I've asked myself many times, how did I get to my stage in life, having been a Christian my whole life, having gone to church my whole life, having sought him my whole life, how did I miss the completeness of grace? I always did know, I thought, that God forgave and was a God of love and grace. But how did I miss that it's the complete package? It's enough in and of itself. The benefits are there without any of the responsibilities, the expectations, the unfulfilled commitments on my part. How did I miss that all these years? And I don't know the answer to that question. It might be my own personality, it might be my upbringing, it might be what I heard in church, in Sunday school all those years, but somehow I developed a perception that was not clear. And I guess basically what I want to say to you is that this community of believers and this message and this place matters. It changes lives. It changed my life. It changed me. I wish I could say that I was exactly where I want to be now spiritually, but you know what? It's enough for me to be able to accept where I am now spiritually, because I know he does, and I know these people do. I am me, and that's okay, and that's huge, a huge change for me. So I just want to say that I appreciate this place. I appreciate this Mike and Denise and Mark, all who have been a big part of my change. Randy, it's so many of you. I appreciate the people that I'm in Bible study with, that we've grown so close to one another through our struggles together and our searching for the truth. And it matters, and this place matters, and I just can't give enough credit to God in this message. So that's my story.
Good morning. Is that close enough? Yeah, good. 20 years ago, I was telling Mike this the other day, 20 years ago, my speech teacher in high school was my girlfriend's mom. It's my mother-in-law. I married that girlfriend, and the fear you see in me right now has deep roots. So bear with me. So yeah, I'm Kent. My family's not here right now. We got guests at our house. We've been here a couple years. I have 3 kids. I'm a stay-at-home dad. My wife works. I have pretty close to the ultimate job most days. So I think what I'm going to do this morning is share a few. I'm going to read to you a few entries into my journal that will. I think they'll illustrate how the message of hope here has changed me. So I'm just going to go back to 2012. 2012, we were living in Rochester, Minnesota. I was staying at home with the kids. My wife was working. I ran a youth ministry for at-risk youth, and I took my faith pretty seriously, as you might be able to tell. So, December 2012, I wrote this. Blessed is the man who delights in the law of the Lord. It's been a week or more since I've been in my Bible and praying. I wonder why I feel guilty about that. Is it because I don't feel I'm doing the things that a Christ follower does, as if I have to meet some standard? It is so easy to be distracted. God, give me a singular desire for this life. Give me a singular desire to pursue you. Please keep me from living my life and forgetting you. Help me to know how to read my Bible. Help me to pray. Give me a heart that delights in you and your mission for my life. Forgive me for being distracted and focus my life on your kingdom. I was pretty zealous. When I read that, I remember the battles that was inside. I had this idea of who God wanted me to be, and I couldn't do that. I kept failing professionally, relationally. My marriage wasn't honoring God as to the degree I thought it was supposed to be. My ministry, I had awesome kids with me, but I didn't see any change in their life, so I figured something was up. I wasn't doing what was right. But one of the cool things about having a journal is I get to look back and see that God is sovereign. So I wrote this prayer about the same time. I didn't really believe this prayer when I wrote it. I think it's just evidence that God was working on me. So January 5th, 2013. God, help me to understand what it means that you are a father. I hold and squeeze and kiss my children, and most of the time I don't want to let them go. Yet I'm not sure that as a grown man, I want to be loved like a child. I'm apprehensive of what type of surrender that might mean. I'm worried that it's not a manly, warrior-like perspective. God, I'm comfortable with you as my commanding officer, and I am your soldier. But I resist the reality that I'm a child, your child. The idea of being hugged by God makes me feel weird. If that's wrong, please change it. That prayer is more prophetic than I can explain this morning. So that's evidence to me that God was still working on me. I didn't believe that at the time. I just kept trying. I would wake up really early to pray for Bible study. I even had an accountability partner to make sure I was up early enough. I'd have to text him every morning so that I was up at 4:30, whatever it was. I'd drag my wife to Bible study. My wife was a medical resident working like 100 and some hours a week, and it's like, no, this is what Christians do. We go to Bible study. But bless her heart, she went. So then later in 2013, we moved here, and we literally live a quarter mile away. So we started coming to church here, and I wrote this, November 19th, 2013. It seems since I started listening to Pastor Mike, I'm seeing God as gentle. I've always believed God punished Jesus on the cross for my sins. And while that made me grateful, it did not remove the guilt. Because every time I sinned, I was adding another lash to Jesus' back. or hitting the nail a little harder as it pierced his hands and feet. But what if it wasn't punishment on the cross, but forbearance, restraint, forgiveness? What if God is not bound by the laws of this world or the law of sin? What if God simply says, because I love you, I will forget about your sin? I don't need to punish someone to be justified. I'm not that insecure of a God. I am full and complete in myself. I don't need you to love me. I want you to. That thought, I'm still writing here, that thought makes me feel like I make God happy, not mad. I think the change that God is making in me right now is to see God as he really is. He's kind, he's patient, and wanting me to know the real him. So, a couple years of soaking in the truth and experiencing the truth of that. I can stand before you confidently and say that's true. That's who God is. We talk a lot here about beliefs that impact attitude, that impact behavior. And obviously my belief has changed. God is a father and I am a son. And that has changed my attitude towards him. I'm not scared. What has it impacted my behavior? I'm not. It hasn't really done much, to tell you the truth. I'm probably a little bit more patient and a little bit more gentle. What it's done is it's made me like God, and it's made me talk to him. This right here is my journal. It is essentially my transcript of my relationship with my Father. I talk to him, he talks to me, not verbally, just in my thoughts. And 9 times out of 10, what he says is, he reminds me who he is. He's a father, and who I am, a son. And there's crazy transforming power in that relationship. So that's my story.
Oh, Travis. Oh, this is a situation I hate finding myself in. However, I get to talk about something that's I can distract you from looking at me and look up here, so that helps. But anyway, just to make you feel sorry for me, I'm sick. So, okay. I have a headache. I woke up with a headache. Yeah, I have 5 kids that I had to get ready this morning by myself. A couple of them arrived late. Yeah, that helps. That helps. I do have good friends that allow me to watch the games at their house, though. Minnesota fans, even. So, but so I'm here to talk about the finances, which can affect people emotionally in many different ways. However, as you heard, it really isn't about that, because God is the provider when it comes down to it. So the money is what the money is. So I'm going to present it pretty much that way. It's not terribly emotional. Sometimes it feels that way as the bookkeeper. But in the end, what happens, happens. And we seem to, for 20 years, to have done with it what we needed to do, and God has provided in many amazing ways. So first, I'm just going to show last year. So last fiscal year, or this is actually last calendar year, so we're going to compare that. So general gifts were $159,000. That was more than what we budgeted. But there is some insurance money. Designated giving is people that, in some cases, we've made a request that something might have been outside of the budget that we didn't plan for, or it was on somebody's heart to give a certain way, and that's where we separate those monies from our general giving, and so you can see that was a pretty decent amount, and then we have. I separate out debt retirement as well. So debt retirement kind of usually towards the end of the year. Sometimes throughout the year we might do fundraising efforts for this, but debt retirement pays our mortgage, and I'll break that down a little bit later, but it's a very important, it has been, at least over the last couple of years, a very important piece to us, I guess you could say, managing our finances on a monthly basis. Oop. Oh, it must bounce. So expense-wise, our biggest expenses obviously are maintaining the facility, and that includes the mortgage payment, which is about $25,000 a year. We finance that for a 20-year term. Payroll expenses are, I rounded these to the nearest 50. So 131.5, which is what we budgeted it to be. Insurance expenses are $7,000 a year, and that pays for workers' comp liability, pays for the vehicle expenses, and then all other expenses. And then just to throw in there, we're gonna be available afterwards if you're interested in how we manage this, or maybe even little breakdown details of it. So I have all that. So for the next year, this is how we're projecting our income source, you could say, so our plan or our projected giving. So we're expecting or hoping for $155,000 worth of general gifts, and that's in the range of what we've generally gotten over the last 5 years or so, on average. So planned use of designated gifts. So this is money that we have sitting in savings. For example, we have somebody that gave money towards the written materials, so the grace books that you've seen, or the 40 days with the 10 commitments, those kind of books. So that's just an example of some planned use for designated gifts. I think Mike might be working on a new book as well, so there's some printing costs related to that. And so this year we're budgeting to have some expenses there. However, it's covered. So that's what that means when it says designated gifts. Okay, debt retirement and other fundraising. So that debt retirement, so we're planning throughout the year to try to continue to raise funds for that category. We might the Rib Fest, for example, or a pancake feed, things like that might go towards the debt retirement, or maybe some other fundraising efforts that we might need that are over and above what we might get out of general gifts. So expense-wise for the next year, we're expecting $43,200, which, if you recall the previous, that's lower. That's typically what we see each year. So that's a kind of an easy fixed expense that we can predict fairly easily after being here 3 years. The utilities tend to be what they are, depending on the weather outside, that sort of thing. Payroll expenses, insurance, as you see, went up a little bit. But that happens. We're kind of at the mercy of the insurance company there, because there aren't a lot of places that are willing to insure this. There are some risks related to this facility. So we've tried to get insurance through another company, and they weren't interested. So anyway, so that went up about $1,200. So that's a little bit of pain there, but anybody that has insurance knows that. All other expenses, so that includes, worship equipment if we need to purchase something new, things like that. So general office supplies, that kind of thing. So breaking down the mortgage. So when we first came in here, it was in April 2012. So you see the value. The amount we borrowed was $300,000. Currently, it's at $275 or just below that. So, we're at a place where we keep moving forward, more principals getting knocked off each year. So total donations, this is just kind of an interesting number, but total donations since we started collecting for, or asking for, or whatever, or had donations towards debt retirement, which was in, I think, October, November of 2012, $74,000 has been given to that specific category. That's big. So currently, and we continue to use it to pay the mortgage payment. So currently we have $11,000, which will pay it through through the end of the year this year. Our fiscal year ends in obviously April 30th, so we have a few more months to gather there if we want to cover it out of non-general funds, if that makes sense. So that's those numbers. And then the last slide, basically, the 8,400 is that difference between January and April covering of the debt retirement. Let's see, medium-term needs. This was on there last year, but we want to keep the idea of our furnaces and those units. I think Dan Bethke has indicated have a few years life left in them. They seem to be doing the job right now. And then we hope this is a long-term need, but it could be a medium-term need. But exterior siding on this place needs some attention. So anyone that owns a house that's older than, I think this place is built in the 80s. It just has some wear and tear, and it's part of ownership. So again, I'll be available in the back for questions if anybody has any detail that they want to know or that sort of thing. So, okay.
Oh, thank you all. Get this out of the way so you can see me. You always know something's up when I'm sitting in the front of the church instead of the back row. I'm one of those, back row Sallies that JC talks about? Or I think there's a male version of that. Back row Sam. That's even cooler. I'm usually the guy in the back row. I always told Mike from the start, you catch them coming in, I'm going to catch them running out. So, I love these annual meetings. It's always great having an opportunity to see where we're at and see where we're heading next. And it's also nice occasionally to look at where we've come from. And that's sometimes the piece that I try to provide is just, a little of the historical perspective. And in fact, we were just at an elder meeting last Saturday night, some of us, and we were talking a little bit, reminiscing about the history of Hope Community Church and thinking back on those days. Like today, we have this awesome facility here, thanks to all of you. Across the pond, we have an equally awesome resource center that we can have access to. But, in the early days of Hope, for many, many years of our existence, we met in the auditorium of the O'Gorman High School. We have no affiliation with the Catholics except that we liked their auditorium and they liked our money. So we met there, and it was really a challenge because it was constant. Every week we set it all up, and then an hour later tear it all down, and even worse, we had to store all of that equipment. And in the early days, we didn't have any place to put all of our, meager equipment that we assembled, so we had this rusty old mail van. Some of you are old enough to remember the the Catholics had the Hope Mobile that the Pope drove around, and we had the Pope Mobile, we had the Hope Mobile, this rusty old mail van that we would pack all of this equipment into every week. And, and then we also, it was rather fitting that today we just had Joel up here doing the one-man band thing, because it really was a great legacy to where we came from. Today we have a worship team. We have all this great equipment. Back then we had Gary. We had one guy with a guitar, and that was our worship team. And that's pretty much what we had. And today also we have this incredible audio visual equipment. We have I think cameras somewhere. We've got, professional sound people back there. We got, just great. Thank you, by the way. So again, we've managed to accumulate all these great resources. Back in the early days of Hope, what we had was a slide projector. And not just any slide projector, a demon-possessed slide projector. We're not just talking Exorcist, we're talking Exorcist 2, the sequel. And because it was hard enough trying to project words to our worship songs, but what made it even harder, when you use a slide projector, you have all these bits and pieces, and you have to sit down and organize them, the flow of the songs, and then you had to have some guy who happened to look a lot like me that operated this thing, and so you had to constantly jump back and forth, first verse, chorus, and then you had to second verse, jump back to the chorus and forward to the second verse, and which was hard enough, especially I didn't grow up knowing these songs. I came in more familiar with REO Speedwagon and Van Halen, so I had to keep like stacks of paper with all these lyrics on them from all these songs, and then arrows, cheat sheets, where it went. And it didn't matter because the projector was demon possessed. So the way this thing worked, forward, if you pushed forward, it would go forward one. If you pushed reverse, it would go forward one. And then occasionally it would just take off. And, my earliest growth spiritually was achieving humility through humiliation. And there were times this thing would just go off on its own, and all I could do was just stand up in the front and turn to everybody and just smile and wave. And, it was so nice getting rid of that thing. I think we ended up putting it in a cypress box and burying it in salt someplace, or maybe I think we might have donated it to the United Church of Christ because they don't believe in demons. I always know that I've done well when I see at least one time Mike go. So, in fact, I've still got clothes in my closet from high school. Don't believe me, believe my wife. We had one of my friends, Mike Donnelly, some of you might know, he was kind of a smarty. He made me this shirt way back in the early 90s, Projector Man. On the front, he put the Reverend Lauritsen. And because he too was Catholic, it seems to be coming up a lot. Actually, he was Irish Catholic, so I think it's pronounced Catlick. Since he was a Catlick, I thought that was a nice touch. Irreverend. Yes, so I'm glad I never threw that away, right along with my bell bottoms and leisure suit. And all of that history is kind of a fitting introduction to the last thing I'd like to touch on. And there's still one last vestige of our history that we haven't managed to discard yet. And that happens to be the bylaws by which we have operated this place for all these years. Just like all of our equipment and so much of everything we gathered when we started this place, we had this, I call it the microwave inception of Hope Community Church. This thing was started on a wing and a prayer, started in the matter of a few weeks with very little money, and somehow, with such humble beginnings, we not only took off and grew, we prospered. And with that history, we also, even when we set up the operating system of this church, the behind-the-scenes mechanics of how we operate as a nonprofit corporation, we even borrowed our bylaws. What we did was we went to Willow Creek Church in Chicago. We looked at some different churches and found how they organized and how they did business. So we thought, well, that kind of works. So we adopted their bylaws pretty much, tweaked them maybe a little bit. And we've always intended to go back and revisit these and clean them up and tailor them more for how we actually do things here at Hope. And it's been a long, drawn-out process. We've had a lot of false starts in rewriting these, or just not even rewriting so much as just tweaking some things. And the urgency of getting those things cleaned up really became apparent once we started to own property. Because it's been said about the church, about a nonprofit or a for-profit corporation, bylaws don't matter to anybody until they matter. After something goes wrong, then these things become supremely important. So as the elders of Hope Church trying to be good stewards, it's always been our interest to operate in a transparent fashion and in a moral and an ethical fashion. And therefore, that's one of the main motivations we had, especially once we added property, to protect ourselves and just to make sure that we're doing everything by the book. So we set about one last time on this project to clean these up and kind of simplify them and streamline them, and I'm just happy to stand up here today and say we got her done. Finally. So, there's nothing more boring than going through those things, but we managed to drive through that, and we had hoped to have copies of those if anybody even cares how they are or how they turned out, but unfortunately those things are still out for legal review. We miss Don Surska for so many reasons, and we all love Don, and very colorful guy, and one of the many things we relied on him for was instant legal advice, and now things take a lot longer, so those things are still out. But what we decided to do, those things are done. We're going to release them. We thought what we'd do, we're going to post them on the Hope Community Church website as soon as we get them back to make sure everything is okay. In the meantime, if people have questions, we put together some questions and answers on that. We've got copies of that up here, so I'm just so nice to have all that done, and that's another thing we can talk about after the service if anybody cares. And beyond that, I just want to say thank you all for your support of this ministry, because as I look out here, what I'm seeing are the true leadership and the true ministers of this church. We've always believed in the priesthood of the believer, and every one of us can reach people that none other can reach but us. And that's why it's so important that we all get this, and we, in our own ways, in our own families, our own neighborhoods, our own communities, take this message of grace forward to those that haven't heard. Because those testimonies today, I would have had tears in my eyes if I was less manly. That to me, nothing more needed to be said today than those two testimonies. Why do we do this? Why did we all build this? That's why. And thank you all for that. It's been a beautiful ride, and I'm glad it ain't over yet. Thank you. Mike asked me to close in prayer. I think he's still speechless. Lord, you did not say, if you build it, they will come. I think that was a Kevin Costner movie. But what you did say concerning the confession of Christ is that on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Thank you, Lord, for what you have so richly blessed us with here. Our ministry, our community, our friendships, our families. Thank you, Lord, for the love that we can have for each other because of the love and the grace and the mercy and the kindness that you have shown first to each one of us. And help us, Lord, under your grace to go forward from here to help those who still need help and to serve those who need service. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. One last thing, if anybody's interested in any aspect of how things are going out here, the business side, the money side, the bylaws side, just please come on up here afterwards. Otherwise, hope you have a great day.